Just like that, we've got the next installment in the MCU, Thunderbolts. What's going on, guys? I'm Chris, and welcome back to another video. So today I got my review of Thunderbolts. I believe this is the 36th film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It hits theaters this Friday, and I was able to see it early, so I'm going to give it my honest thoughts, as I always do. Before I get into this, be sure to hit that like button, comment down below your predictions or expectations for Thunderbolts if you have not yet seen it, and of course, subscribe and hit that notification bell to help reach my goal of 150,000 subscribers here on the channel. So when it comes to Thunderbolts, this was a movie that was one of my most anticipated of the year. I loved all the marketing we got. I was fully bought in. And so it's safe to say that I had created a certain set of expectations that might have been unrealistic to meet. I'm speaking from personal experience here. Everyone has different sets of expectations going into movies or shows. I had set the bar pretty high, and that might have been a mistake that, can directly impact an experience with the movie, at least in first-time viewing. So I had to let you know up front, I had high expectations for Thunderbolts, and I don't know if they were met, but was that ever a realistic expectation? Probably not, to be completely honest. And I also have to say, there are a fair share of pros and cons for this film. This is not just gonna be, oh, I hate this movie. Oh, I love this movie. There's a lot more to it than just that. Let's start with the pros for Thunderbolts. I would say the Yelena and Red Guardian father-daughter dynamic is a major highlight of Thunderbolts. I've said this many times and I mean it. Those two characters in the post-Endgame era, some of my favorite additions. They make their debut in the MCU in Black Widow, which was a prequel film, but still, they are great there. And then we get more of Yelena in the Hawkeye show, and she is such a fascinating character. Her inner conflict, her backstory, the fact that she lost Natasha, but she also got blipped herself, and so there is just a lot of meat on the bone with the character of Yelena they explore here, and that opens the door to a whole nother conversation about mental health that's present in this film. Like, this movie, Thunderbolts, tackles mental health, depression, the exploration of past trauma of various characters really well, and because of that, I'd say it's one of the more mature MCU films in that sense, where it's tackling some pretty serious subject matter, and it's like a classic case of the villain of the film being a physical embodiment of sort of the deeper themes present, I think the Raimi trilogy really excelled at that, but it's present here as we see in the third act. I don't want to say too much, but you'll know what I mean when you watch the movie, or you probably already know if you've seen the marketing. But still, like I said, a lot of the, heart of this film revolves around Red Guardian and Yelena's relationship. Yelena's at a point where there's a bit of a darkness inside of her that tries to win over at times, and Red Guardian kind of down in the dumps. He's got his limo service that I'm repping today, you already know. But still, they're a bit disbanded as the unconventional family that they once were. However, Yelena's always going to view Red Guardian as a father figure, and so she returns to him, and over the course of the movie, we see them sort of rekindle a relationship, but open up and grow emotionally, and I really felt as though they were the anchor of this film from an emotional standpoint, and any scene they had together, there's one near the start of the third act that really pulls on the heartstrings, and both Florence Pugh and David Harbour crush it there. Like, they are the stars of this film, in my opinion. And you know who else is a star of this film, surprisingly? Bob. Bob is in a lot of the marketing, and I didn't watch a lot of the recent marketing. I saw some of the major trailers, but they kept hitting us with trailers and TV spots to the point of me being like, I gotta step away. I don't want to see too much here. And this character, played by Pullman, has a way, larger of a role than I actually anticipated going in. And so that was something that I had to sort of adapt to on the fly. Had no idea that he was going to be as prominent of a character here. And he's got a lot of screen time. Like, you're getting a lot of Bob. And with that, there are some great comedic bits. There's sort of an ongoing bit of characters saying Bob's name. That got a lot of laughs out of the audience, including myself. It was one of the funniest ongoing bits. But at the same time, the character of Bob has a very troubled past, and that ties right back into that whole discussion of mental health. And I feel like this film really tackles it, and with him, it's fairly on the nose. As you'll see, it's pretty evident what they're doing with this character here, having a darkness overtake him, having, him have to fight that. It's very representative of inner demons that we all face in the world. So it got real with some, real world mental health issues. And I felt like that's pretty timely, especially in the year 2025, as opposed to 2008 when the Marvel Cinematic Universe kicked off. But the movie's called Thunderbolts, so you go in expecting that, right? And you get it. There's a team up here for sure. And it consists of, Yelena and Red Guardian, who I mentioned earlier. Bucky Barnes is in this film, played by Sebastian. I'll talk more about him in a second. But you've also got characters like John Walker, Ghost, Taskmaster. Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic for sure. I felt as though by the end of the movie, this team up really worked. They're unconventional in a sense of, the early goings of the Guardians of the Galaxy. By the end of the movie, it's like this ragtag group, but you can see them starting to have this bond, and it's this really unconventional family dynamic that ends up working. That's how I felt with Thunderbolts, especially by the third act of the film. And the setup for this team was unlike any other team up we've seen in the MCU. There was a lot of trickery at play. It was almost like there was this accidental moment where the team ends up forming, and it was unexpected, but it was a pleasant surprise, I'd say. The first 2 acts of this movie are just fun. They're exciting. They feel fresh, not to use that word too much, but I feel like it's applicable to Thunderbolts. You'll see that word, tagged to Thunderbolts a bunch because I think it is valid. This movie feels fresh. It's not as cut and dry, formulaic as some of the other MCU films we've seen. It's got its own voice, and I appreciate it for that. I would say my favorite act, probably the middle. That's when we get my favorite action sequence in the entire movie. You've seen it in the trailers. I won't say exactly what it is, but it does involve Bucky Barnes. And that scene to me was the most riveting in the entire film. It felt like Phase 2 MCU, vintage stuff. I had chills. Honestly, I did. But this is not an action-packed movie. And I'm not saying you need to have action in the MCU or a superhero movie for it to be good. Because trust me, there are plenty of superhero films out there that aren't some action spectacle extravaganzas, but I did expect a little more based on the marketing. They're going on like the practical stunts of it all. And when you're talking about an MCU movie, you got to address the humor because it's become a thing. MCU humor, right? To me, it worked a lot here. Bob and that bit, it got the laughs going, but Red Guardian was the major, win in the humor department for Thunderbolts. I thought David Harbour was on fire here. I mean, he's the man. If you didn't know this about me, I love Stranger Things, and Hopper's my favorite character. He plays Hopper in Stranger Things, if you didn't know. And so I have an affinity for that actor, and he crushes it as Red Guardian here. Just multiple moments where you can get a good laugh. He's kind of the dumb, lovable idiot at times. He plays that character really well. And you just can't help but laugh and love this man in this film and this role. So Red Guardian was a standout for me, and I had to represent him in this review. You guys already know. But let's transition over into some of the cons I had with the movie, because it's not perfect in my opinion. I wanted it to be. I wanted it to be sky high in my MCU ranking. That's not the case, but I can still enjoy the film, right? So we're getting into some cons here. I'd say one of my biggest issues with Thunderbolts is that final act. It tries something different. And I think I do have to commend it for not following the formula of a lot of MCU films. But the final act, to me, the only comp I can think of is like, it felt Multiverse of Madness-esque stylistically with certain decisions they made. It was a little bizarre, the direction they took the movie. Because for the first 2 acts of Thunderbolts, it was that grounded, street level MCU film. And then we get to the third act and it kind of takes it up a notch. We leave the street level elements behind and go a little too into the not magical, mystical elements, but otherworldly ideas are sort of brought in, and it can get a little trippy, I'll say that much. And it didn't fully land with me. That doesn't take away from the ride, the fun time I had with the first 2 acts of the movie, but it does sour it a little because the ending is what you're going to remember the most, and I felt like it didn't fully work for me, especially if we're talking about the final moments. Those specifically felt rushed, in my opinion. And I think the major gripe I have walking out of this film is I had a realization, almost like a come to Jesus, that the MCU as a whole is rushed right now. And so me feeling that the conclusion of this film was done too quickly, kind of representative of a bigger issue in that the MCU is racing to the next Avengers film right now. They're trying desperately to get Doomsday out, and I believe they're starting to film this week, and the script's not even complete. And so I've had waning interest and excitement for Avengers Doomsday. Recently, I claimed, I'm bought in. I think they're going to do it. But after this movie, I have to come back down a little bit and be like, man, I'm concerned. I am. Because there is a bit of this rush, this urgency to get to the Avengers, when in reality, I can't say too much without spoiling, but after this, it's evident to me that there are going to be some butting heads internally between heroes maybe that we're not going to see until said Avengers film probably. And so that is frustrating. That's frustrating to me because, like I've said, we don't have an Avengers team in the MCU right now. We haven't seen one, right? Well, after this movie, the plot thickens, but maybe not for the better. There's a real potential that we could be heading towards a convoluted mess in Doomsday. That's all I'm going to say. It worries me. It scares me. That's a topic for another time. Specifically with this film, I just believe that there was a bit of a rushed finale. Like, genuinely, when the movie ended, I was like, whoa, it's over? And I feel like this movie could have gone on for 45 more minutes. Not saying, oh, I needed 45 more minutes because I was so glued to the screen, but I feel like we were almost robbed of 30 to 45 minutes of closure for the story this movie presented, but also like wrapping up the character arcs within this individual film, because it did feel like, boom, that's it, movie's over. And it shocked me a little. I was like, whoa, that's the end? But harkening back to my expectations, right? This point I'm about to make could fully be a me thing because of my expectations. I was surprised with the amount of time we spent with certain characters as opposed to others. It was like some were at the forefront while others were waiting around on the sidelines for a good chunk of the movie, and I was astounded with the decision they made to leave certain characters out of the first, I'd say, hour of the movie. In fact, I will say they sidelined Bucky, I feel, and Red Guardian for a good chunk of the movie. So who are we dealing with instead? Yelena, who's great, but characters like John Walker and Ghost, who are inherently less interesting, have less of a screen presence, and in this movie specifically, have less to do. They don't change much from beginning to end. They don't really have a purpose in the movie. And I know in a lot of team-up films you could, single out characters, so it might be unfair or nitpicky of me to do this, but Ghost specifically was a character we saw in Ant-Man and the Wasp. Haven't seen her since, and she's just here because she was working in like shadow ops with Val, and that's really it. Doesn't really do much else. So she's just kind of filling out the squad, and it felt strange. And I feel like John Walker had a little more to do. They, explore a little of his backstory, but the character of Ghost specifically just was here. And it's great when you have a team-up movie where you care equally about everyone. There isn't like the odd man out, but inevitably that's the case here, and I feel like Ghost is just there to fill space. And of course, Contessa Valentina Allegra de Fontaine is in this film, played by Julie Louis-Dreyfus, and I hope that we're kind of done with her after this, because she's a great actress, don't get me wrong, and she's a comedic genius as Elaine in Seinfeld. Respect to her. But her character, I feel like, was introduced at a point in time in the MCU where they didn't know where they wanted to go, and now maybe her purpose has been served. I think we can kind of start to move away from that, in my opinion, just because I was never fully sold on her role in the MCU, and frankly, the political side of the MCU. What I mean by that is like, presidential race, or like in Brave New World and here, some of the political elements just aren't the most interesting. It's not like we're watching, Succession or something with some great writing about politics. It's just pretty bare bones political races, and I'm not very interested in that. I would be if there was a reason to care, but Val's whole plot in this film and her like desire for power, trying to not be impeached, all this stuff, like, I didn't care that much. It never fully sold me. I was never invested in it all that much. But all that to say, Thunderbolts is a very enjoyable film. The new team-up dynamic is fresh. The first two acts are a lot of fun. And yes, I have cons with this movie, and just because I spent some time talking about them doesn't mean I hate the movie. I think that society, I guess, needs to understand there's more to it than loving and hating. There is a happy medium. There's operation in that gray area, and that's kind of where I'm at. Like, I would say this is a 7 out of 10, 3.5 out of 5. I'm going to see it again later this week and reevaluate. Like, I feel like with the knowledge of what happens in this film, I might be able to appreciate it more. I might see more flaws. That's the beauty of it, is I'm not, making a claim, this is the greatest MCU movie ever, this is the worst ever, it's better than this, it's worse than this. Like, it's just an enjoyable MCU film. It explores some mature themes that aren't present in other MCU films. The first two acts, I was really having a fun time, and the third act didn't land for me fully. But the movie's filled with some awesome characters like Yelena, Red Guardian, and Bucky, and it's got memorable moments. I did not adore this one, and I think that's where some of that original disappointment stems from in my out-of-theater action, where I wanted to be over the moon about this movie. But that's kind of a me thing, and I think buying into the hype train for anything, it's dangerous. It's fun to drink the Kool-Aid. It's fun to buy in, but it will hurt more if something ends up being disappointing. And maybe this will teach me to learn my lesson of, hey, just go in with as low to no expectations as possible. And it's very hard to do because it's human nature to be excited for things. But I think that's the route I gotta go moving forward. When it comes to Thunderbolts, I enjoyed my time, and I'm very curious to see where we're headed with Fantastic Four, because that movie is going to be a big one in only a few months now. But that does it for my thoughts on Thunderbolts. I believe I touched on everything there. Let me know in the comments down below what you think, if you've seen the movie, as well as your expectations or predictions if you have not yet seen it. Hit that like button, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, and be on the lookout for more videos coming very soon. But until next time, I'll see you guys later.